All right. Hello and welcome to everybody. Thank you for joining us for our CMMC compliance covering practices and processes. Today's speaker is going to be Thomas Koch. He's the Chief Strategy Officer of Bitlift Cybersecurity.
Yeah, thanks for the intro, Sam. And I'd like to introduce myself a little bit. As Sam mentioned, I'm Thomas Koch, Chief Strategy Officer of Bitlift Cybersecurity. I'm also an attorney by trade, and I work with clients across the manufacturing space and a few others with a special focus on really high compliance industries like defense contractors. And at Bitlift, we work with a number of these. In my spare time, I'm watching the cybersecurity blogs and looking at the legislation, the trends, economics, and all the new policies that come out. I have a law degree from Michigan State University and a bachelor's from Kalamazoo College here in Michigan. Now, Bitlift, we're a managed cybersecurity company. We're based in mid-Michigan. We offer the traditional things you see with an MSSP, a 24/7 monitoring support, instant threat remediation, and a dedicated SOC team. But we're also a software company that's built our own SOAR platform and our own central threat intelligence platform that actually helps our clients get to be proactive. And we're putting a lot of stake into the CMMC and helping companies reach the security that they need. And we're scalable for the larger businesses and the medium-sized businesses. So we're not just some big enterprise company. So what we're going to cover today, some of you might have been on my previous sort of CMMC 101 webinar, but I want to do a quick refresher on what CMMC is and some of the brass tacks basic stuff. Then we're going to take a look at what I call the CMMC Pyramid. This is something that will be found in the resources we provide at the end. That's taken directly from the Department of Defense page and talks a little bit more about the processes and practices and where those fall. Then we're going to dive into a more deep discussion of those processes and practices. And then we're going to have a timeline of when all of this has to be ready and when you need to be up to speed on this, and also some resources that we can give you. And we're going to close with Q&A. And please do not hesitate to ask questions. Please jump in. I'm always eager to answer the questions that are out there and see what's on people's mind. So as you probably know, if you're here already, you've researched the term CMMC, but just for brass tacks, it's Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. And this is a new certification being put out by the Department of Defense and the contractors that do any business with the Department of Defense. And it pertains to contractors specifically using what's known as CUI, which is confidential unclassified information. And they announced this a while ago, actually. It's been on the books and been announced widely, but really the policies came into scope and came into reality in 2020. And there's going to be a grace period to get up and running. So it's not something where they've got a hard deadline and, hey, by this date, you have to have this done. They're going to give people some time to actually get up to speed and get working on this. A number of our clients who are in the defense contractor space are already getting pre-assessments done today, so those are going on. You may already be doing that yourself. You may be doing a self-assessment. This is a process that's begun, and some of the assessors know quite a bit, but obviously we don't know yet quite what those final assessments will look like. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the timeline. And the big thing about CMMC is it covers the domains of cybersecurity, and it adds a number of requirements that previously weren't in place. So some of the requirements in the CMMC are already things that you're probably doing or already things that you should be holding yourself to those standards, but they've added some things to that to make this a little bit more secure as cybersecurity has become more paramount in the world we live in. So what's the source of the CMMC? As I mentioned, a lot of this is already covered through some existing standards. We all know about the NIST standards and the DFAR standards in the defense industry. These are standards that are commonly applied, and they basically took those and added some things to those. And to a large extent, they pulled directly from them. In fact, you'll see when I go through this that they reference specific sections. So this isn't something brand new where you've never thought about it before. It's things that you may already be doing today with a little bit of tweaking and tuning. The main difference is you cannot self-certify. So in the past, under NIST and DFARS, you were able to actually self-certify and say, we're meeting these standards. And we actually went through this with one of our clients where they came to us and said, hey, we've been self-certifying for years, but there's a couple of things we really don't know if we do or not. We assumed we were doing them or it seemed like we were. And now we're actually having someone assess us and we're finding out that maybe we need to tighten those up a little bit or do a little bit more. So just keep that in mind. You can't self-certify. Many organizations, I'll repeat it again, are already doing some of these things, and they're already in a good position to make this happen. Some will meet this requirement from day one, and it won't be a problem for them. What I always take the approach of, though, is that you're not trying to get compliant to the CMMC. What you want to do is make sure that your organization is secure first. And if you're secure and you're doing all the things you're supposed to do, you're going to be compliant at the right level. So it's kind of like, school testing. You don't want to teach to the test. You want to actually make sure that you're teaching the material, and then the test will be passable. Same thing here. Get secure, have the right processes in place, have the right security processes or practices, and you're going to be compliant as a result of that. Some other key points, again, I'm going to reiterate this, it's going to be repetitive, but I want to make sure people aren't scared or worried about this. You've already got some level of security in place. You're already doing something cybersecurity-wise, so don't feel like, unless you're doing nothing at all, and then, obviously you've got a big hurdle to go through. But if you've been doing work with the Department of Defense, you probably already have a decent amount of security stuff going on. Also, I don't know if I fully agree with the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours rule, but there are no quote unquote experts in CMMC. Nobody spent 10,000 hours with it. Nobody spent all this time. There's a lot of information available. There's a lot of very smart people who will know what they're talking about. I've spent a decent amount of time jumping into this and getting to know it, but there are no experts. Nobody's going to be able to say, here's the perfect answer to every single question. They may take some time to research it. I also want to make sure that everyone feels like they're not overwhelmed. Address things in small chunks. Do it in an ongoing process. Set goals for yourself. When we work with a client, our goal isn't day one to be perfect. Our goal is to, over time, improve things so that you can create a culture of security around that and make sure that you're not overwhelming yourself. And this is something we've heard a number of people call us and say, oh my gosh, I'm freaking out. I need to have a conversation now. I need to do X, Y, and Z. They're going back and trying to find budget, and it's a real struggle. And that's not the way to approach it. You have to be calm and have to say, what can we do today to get to where we need to go? And I would suggest, a lot of you are in industry groups. A lot of you participate in groups online, chat rooms, things like that. Listservs, however it works. Talk to others and ask where they are. What I've found in the security space is people oftentimes aren't talking to others about what they're doing or asking other people what they're doing. But when we've put our clients together in a room or on a conference call together, it's amazing the conversations that people have, because they may have a solution to something that you're not thinking of that they've been doing for a while, and vice versa. You may be giving them some solutions. So here's that exciting CMMC pyramid that I talked about before. One of the things to remember, there are 17 total domains of security. There's another infographic that kind of goes through those. But really the key here is it's a mix of practices and processes that will determine which level of CMMC compliance you have. And this isn't I do one really well and I don't do the other well at all, so give me a number. It's you want to achieve if you want to be level 3, you want to be level 3 on both sides of things. There's a lot to consider here, and we're going to jump into each one of these a little bit more specifically. But the key thing to remember here is obviously it's levels 1 through 5. From what I'm told and the conversations I've had, most people will fall into the level 2, level 3 area. Level 3 probably the biggest. There are others that will tell you level 2 is the biggest. Very few people are saying that level 4 and 5 will be where most people fall. Obviously, though, level 3 is where you should shoot for. That's good cyber hygiene. It's great to get to that point. And over time, if you can get to level 4 and level 5, that's even better. So again, 5 levels of processes. These come to a large extent directly from NIST and DFARS. You can't self-certify. You're probably doing some of these already. And again, you want to get secure first, and then you'll be compliant as a result of the security. So now what I want to do is jump in and actually talk about those 5 levels of processes and what it means. The process side of things is pretty simple. It starts off at level 1 with 0 required processes. This just means that some level of security is being quote unquote performed, and that some of the practices that you're putting in place are documented where required. It's really nothing beyond that. This is the lowest level. It's the easiest one to achieve, obviously, because it's level 1. And essentially almost any organization out there should be able to meet this standard from day 1. It shouldn't be, when it comes to these processes, really difficult to do. What makes it great is going on from there, level 2, 3, 4, 5. Then we start talking about having 2 processes at each, or the number of processes going up by that number. So at level 2, there are 2 processes that you have to have. And this includes, this amounts to documented security. So basically what this means is that you've got an organizational policy that exists that talks about all of your activities, but it's just a policy. It's not something that you're necessarily inflicting on people or enforcing on people. You're looking at the level 1 practices. It's including the processes from level 1, and at level 2 you're basically just documenting what you're doing. We've got this policy in place, and here's what I'm doing over time to do this. It's pretty basic still, and all it is just really about documentation. But level 3 is a jump. Now we're talking about managed security. There are 3 processes. Each practice is being documented, including the lower level. An organizational policy exists that covers all of the activities, but more importantly, you've got a plan that exists and is maintained that includes everything. So you're not just saying, hey, here's our policy. You've got a written plan somewhere where you're managing this plan and you're documenting what's going on with that plan. So this may include having a mission around cybersecurity. It may be including having goals for cybersecurity, specific project plans. You're talking more about the resourcing. What are the tools we're going to need? Who's the staff that we're going to need? What's the training that we need? And also, who are the relevant stakeholders? So now you're starting to talk to upper management about this a little bit more. You're also talking to people lower in the company and giving them a sense of, hey, security is on our mind. We need to make sure that this is an organizational goal. And a lot of organizations that are at this point, people have at least sat through 1 or 2 meetings about their company security processes. When it gets to reviewed, we add everything that we've just talked about. You have 4 processes now because you've got the practices are documented, there's a policy, there's a plan, and now you're reviewing those things. So you say, okay, we had this plan, now we're tracking. Was it effective? Did it actually get us to a certain point? Can we go back to higher management now and report to them? And higher management knows what we're doing security and knows that it's effective, security-wise, and knows that it's effective. So we're actually able to report on this, review what we're doing, tweak and tune our processes and our plans so that we can actually get secure. If something didn't work, let's stop doing it or fix it. If it did work really well, let's do more of it or expand that process. And lastly is when it's optimized. And this is basically, now we've gone across the whole company. We've got practices and processes that everyone is using. Everything's being reviewed and measured. We're keeping metrics on this. We're sharing this with higher ups. There's a standardized approach across all the organizational units. So it's not just an IT problem anymore. It's a business situation, where the business side of the house knows what's going on. Everybody within the company has that security culture and really thinks about it, and you're working at security at the highest level you possibly can. Now, going into the practices, this is where you have to be a little bit more in depth because the practices, there's a lot more to think about in my mind. The plan now, actually, the plan is the strategy. The practices are actually the tactics you use within that strategy. So again, this is almost an identical slide of the one I gave before. Don't be overwhelmed. There are no experts. Make sure you're talking to other people and make sure you understand that you've probably got some of these already in place. So don't freak out and think you have nothing ready. At level 1, there are 17 practices that amount to basic cyber hygiene. And essentially what they are is equivalent to what's known as Federal Acquisition Regulation 48. I'm not going to read that out loud to you. You can go look at it. It's what's known as FAR. Many of you are probably already well aware of this, but the 17 practices that are in there, that's where you're going to fall for basic cyber hygiene. So it means you're doing more than nothing, but you're still pretty low level on the pole, but you've got some things thought out. You're doing some of these practices live and in real time. Next, we jump to intermediate cyber hygiene. And this is where it kind of gets interesting because we jump from 17 practices to 72. So this is a huge jump. It's a jump of 55 practices from the previous round. Organizations are going to have to comply with FAR that we talked about before, but level 2 also includes a select subset of 48 practices from this NIST standard that's listed. And then an additional 7 practices that are listed within the regulation that support intermediate hygiene. So this is a big jump. But again, a lot of companies are already probably around level 2 if you're following NIST standards. But go through, make a list. Am I doing all these things? How many of these things are easy to add, or how many of these things are more difficult to add? When clients come to us, the first thing we do is assess where they stand at that given point in time. So we want to know from a baseline, here's where you stand today, and here's where you have to get if you know that you have to be at level 2, and let's help you get there and make that 55 practices, that jump, not seem like it's as big of a jump. Especially because all of a sudden in the next round, you jump up 58 practices to 130 practices total. And level 3 is the one that I think people should spend most time on, because again, it's my belief, this is an opinion, but that level 3 is most commonly where defense contractors will have to fall under CMMC. So again, you go back to the original slide, the first 2 slides, you've got FAR. Then now we're talking about that same NIST regulation, but all of the practices, not the 48 from the subset, everything that's in there. And then an additional 20 practices that support good cyber hygiene. So this is a big jump, and because it's the most common, this is the one that I think you really should start diving into and figure out, are we here? Are we already in this position? It's a really good jumping off place. If you start thinking I have to be level 3, you're going to be a lot better off than you start at level 1 and say, okay, maybe we're level 2, let's add more. Start here and say, do we do this? Build your checklist around this. Now, the latter 2 levels, level 4 and level 5, the jump isn't as big. These are basically the steps that you're taking are getting you to a higher level of cybersecurity that even professionals like myself who were in the space would say is a lot. You know, this is something that a lot of organizations aren't doing today. So these are advanced levels of cybersecurity. In fact, the last one is called advanced. But here we're talking about getting proactive. So again, the FAR regulation, all the practices from NIST, a select subset of 11 practices from a different NIST regulation that's new and coming out. And there's an additional 15 practices demonstrate proactive cybersecurity. The key thing to remember here, and this is something we talk a lot about at Bitlift every day, we're using AI and machine learning, we're threat hunting, we're creating threat intelligence. This is where you're actually getting proactive. You're not just waiting for something to happen to you and then remediating it. You're going out offensively and doing some security. For a typical organization, that's not possible today. You can bring in a third party and work with them, and they can help you get there. But it's really difficult for a small organization to have this. Your bigger organizations, they may have an entire security team. We were just talking to somebody, and they would be by far and away the largest client we've ever worked with. Their team this is a massive company. If I told you the name of it, you'd say, oh my gosh, I absolutely know who those guys are. And even they are saying, hey, we strive to get to proactive, but we're not there yet, even with a team of people. So you're going to see proactivity be something where you're really utilizing some advanced tools, or you've got experts on your staff that really, really, really know what they're doing. Or you've brought in a third party who's great at what they do. The last one is advanced or progressive cybersecurity, and this goes up to 171 practices. So again, you've noticed that the jumps are a little bit smaller. Goes back to FAR, goes back to the NIST regulation we talked about, another 4 from that new draft NIST regulation, and then an additional 11 practices to demonstrate advanced cybersecurity. This is top-end cybersecurity. This is an organization that's really spending a significant amount of time, money, effort. They've got a great staff for this, and it's difficult to achieve. You can do it with a small team, but they would have to be pretty advanced engineers. So, you know, you'd have to have a really, really strong SOC and a really, really good set of tools that you're using, and that you're using those tools properly. You know, one of the things that we see it as part of this is that a lot of organizations went out and acquired a bunch of security tools. Most of our clients have in the double digits, right around the 10, 11, 12 area. The worst I've seen so far is that somebody had 50 security tools. None of them were fully integrated. It was a kind of a you know, a messy situation, but it did actually create some problems within the organization. But they're not advanced yet because they didn't know how to use all those tools. There are organizations that could take 50 security tools, make them integrate with each other. They can do custom coding and so forth. That's pretty rare and pretty out there. So when do I have to be ready, and are there other resources? I want to give a quick timeline and then list some resources that we found to be relatively effective, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. This is a quick timeline that we took from somebody else, so this is not ours. We give credit to them, not us. But as you can see, it's got a good list. If you look where we are right now, we're just at the tail end of Q4 for the fiscal year of 20, based on how this is defined. And what that means is that we're in the process of selecting the C3 PAOs. No, those are not Star Wars characters. Those are the third-party assessment organizations. So it's a great name. I think for geeks like me, I always get a laugh out of it. I don't know why. I probably should be more mature. But the point is that they're just selecting those people now and beginning to train the assessors who will actually be doing this. But everything's been released about the CMMC. We know what's there. There's a board that's been selected that oversees this process, and we'll continue to update those. There's some updated guides that are coming out. There are some DFARS rule changes coming up in the near future. So there's some things that are going on out there. But as you can see, though, even those are sort of targeted milestones. So achieved milestones, these selectors, it began actually in May. We're being selected. They're out there and available. You can go find some of these people and do some pre-assessments if you want to and engage with one of them today. But actual assessments won't be starting until later in the year. We have a great list of CMMC blogs. We have some videos. We've been doing other webinars, and have at least one additional webinar planned at bitlift.com. So please go ahead and check those out and visit that page. The other thing is, I would suggest looking at the Undersecretary of Defense website specific to CMMC. There's a lot of information there, and it's just a good place to look if you want to get sort of the brass tacks basics. Here's what it is, and you want to read through the entire regulation and have it, highlighted and know what's going on. We also found this great website, cmmcaudit.org. There's a great glossary there, a lot of the terms that are going to be here, some of which you'll already know really well, some of which may be new, but I would suggest taking some time to go there and review that. And lastly, if you want to know more about the 3 PAOs, going to the FedRAMP website and taking a look at what that looks like, and who those people will be, and kind of get a predictor on what that would be. Also, because you've sat through our assessment or our webinar today, we do offer a cybersecurity assessment. There's a couple different avenues. One, on our website, we have a simple assessment you can do. If you want a more in-depth assessment, reach out to us. We do sort of an in-depth discovery questionnaire. We review and discuss what's going on in your IT and OT architecture, and then we'll actually install a network monitor for 30 days, do a quick vulnerability scan. That's pretty good, and look at your internal and external networks. And at the end of that, we're going to look at those. We're going to review and discuss all the scans that we take and look at what we find with the network monitor to recommend any changes or improvements you can make in your network and see if we found any vulnerabilities or gaps. So it's a pretty simple assessment. It's relatively easy to do. It's low cost. Feel free to reach out to us. Our team of engineers are really solid. We only, as a company, hire tier 3 and tier 4. We don't have any tier 1s. So, regardless of the time of day, somebody's looking at things that's, capable of actually working on the problems. And that's the end of my presentation, my prepared part. Now I'd love to open it up to Q&A if anybody has any questions.
Yeah, the first question I see is, what are the biggest hurdles for companies to become compliant?
That's a great question. I think so far from what I've heard, the people I've talked to, the biggest hurdle is assessing where they are today and building the plan for what they actually have to do to be compliant. So a lot of times they're doing the right things, but they haven't really documented it the right way. And so now they need to sit down and put pen to paper on some of that stuff, but also have somebody come in and say, yeah, you're doing this right or you're doing this wrong. Live example, we worked with a client, they're an aerospace circuitry type company, and they were doing a lot of things really, really well, but there were a couple of things they were doing really, really poorly. And they kind of knew they were doing it poorly. It wasn't a shock to them, but having somebody come in and say, you know what, you could improve this. And so our engineers looked at it and said, this is what we'd recommend. And it wasn't like a huge change. The other thing I think that's going to be a hurdle is there will be some spend here as organizations have to resource up. And whether that's, hiring a third-party company like us, hiring a new employee, acquiring a new tool, there's going to be some budgetary discussions. But the way I look at it is this applies to your current contracts and your future contracts. So, if you're someone who does the type of work that requires defense contracts, then it's worth the spend over time. And my understanding is there will be some federal dollars available to cover the costs of getting compliant with this.
Are there services available for people to bring in independent auditors without repercussions?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's, right now there are auditing firms who are not officially certified yet, but who know what the audits will look like. In a previous life, I was a regulator, and I had coworkers who would say, until a regulation is live, you can't talk about it. But if you know everything that's in the regulation, you can talk about it, right? And so there are people who know, hey, here's what the CMMC says. Here's what you're going to need to be compliant at this level. Tell us what level you want to be at, and we'll review and see if you're there. So there are independent groups doing this. It can also be a self-assessment initially, where if you've got somebody on a compliance person on your team. They can go through and look at some of this stuff. I would say just be cautious with that, because you don't want to navel gaze and be stuck saying, oh yeah, I think we've got this covered. You really want to be strict with yourself and be as harsh as possible and ask the tough questions. So that's where great third parties come in. We just talked with an auditing firm yesterday, and they've already been doing this for a lot of their clients. They charge a lower rate for a pre-assessment, and then when the assessment comes on, they'll have somebody on staff that's actually one of the C3PAOs and can do this.
Are there any repercussions for not being CMMC compliant, or is it just the lack of contracts?
Well, yeah, and that's a pretty significant repercussion, right? If you can't work with the Department of Defense, you're going to have to do it. A lot of the companies that we deal with, we see different types. We have one client down in Indiana who is not. They hadn't been doing defense work, but they wanted to get into it. And so they're kind of building everything from the ground up for that side of the house. And they're going to be CMMC compliant from day one. But the type of work they did in the past didn't require it. So they were making the investment to begin with. But most of the companies we're talking to, a great deal of their company's revenue comes from government contracts. And what was great about that for them is those contracts continued to be filled even during the pandemic. So they were pretty durable, sustainable businesses. And you don't want to lose that durability and sustainability. I haven't seen it with CMMC personally, but I've seen it happen in the auto industry where somebody slipped off a supplier list and it killed their business, and they laid everybody off, and it was done overnight. So it can be a drastic difference. But again, there's going to be some grandfathering in. It's not like someone's going to show up day one and helicopters are going to land on your front lawn and they're going to say, stop all the work you're doing. You can no longer work with the Department of Defense. They're going to give you time, but this should be something you're doing judiciously and that you're preparing for.
All right. The last question I have here is, if you had to get started on this today, what's the number one thing that you would get on your radar? Because it's either going to be the biggest lift or the biggest spend. What would you start with immediately?
That's a great question. And I actually wouldn't start with what's going to be the biggest lift or spend. What I would say is sit down and say, where do I need to be? Which level? So if I need to be level 3, analyze where I stand today, and then begin putting together a budget of any tools I need to bring in and any resources I need to bring in. And do I have them already and I just need to move some things around, or are they going to be completely de novo, brand new things we do? And so in the case of one of our contractors, they needed to install a SIM. They had never had a SIM before, and they didn't really know how to operate it. And so their initial thought was, we'll go buy one and we'll just put it up ourselves. Then they said, you know what, let's bring in a third party to manage this because we really don't know anything about it. So they did their own personal assessment based on they have to be level 3, and said, we need this. And we have regular conversations with them where we say, what's the next step? Do you need us to do anything further? And they lead those conversations, and they have a pretty detailed checklist. So assembling that checklist and then starting to see, okay, what should we be doing budget wise, if anything? What are the asks that we need to make? Are there things that we can do right now today to prepare for this? And I think the other thing that I would say is, when it comes to cybersecurity, the biggest thing that we still see as a company is there's a lot of gray area. There's a lot of mystification. And what's disheartening as a vendor is we've gone to conferences where people tell us they think half of what a cybersecurity vendor says is completely and totally fake, or completely and totally fluff. And there are a lot of vendors, sadly, that are doing that. So you do have to research cybersecurity if you don't know it already. Learn the terminology. That's why I think some of those resources that we had, go to those glossaries, go and learn the terminology, go and learn what you need to know, so that when somebody's in your office talking to you, if they say something that's ridiculous or doesn't really make sense, that you can say, okay, that doesn't make sense. Why'd you say it that way? And I'll tell you, this has been effective. We met with a client, and they said, when they were asking questions about CMMC, a lot of vendors were just shaking their head yes and saying, of course we do that, but wouldn't go into any depth. We won the deal and started working with them because, as the CMMC expert on the team, I was able to talk to the guy specifically and show some knowledge. So make sure that whatever vendors you're working with, or if you're bringing in new vendors, quiz them on the CMMC. Ask them if they actually know what they're talking about, or are they just going to say it? And we actually, this is a real story. We did not win the deal. So, I'm a little bit upset about it, but a competitor got it. But there was a company, a big company, that you got, again, would be relatively well known. And they came to us, and what had happened was they had gone through 4 separate vendors where they had signed the contract and were ready to implement, and said, okay, we need some assurances in writing as a part of this because we're amping up for CMMC. And the second they asked for anything in writing, the company said, well, we actually don't do what we said. We've got this sort of janky solution that we're going to put in place. And as a result of it, they kicked them out. And when they came to us, we were one of 2 vendors that actually could put in writing, this is what we're going to do for you, and day one we can accomplish this. In that case, we were the Buick price. They went with the Geo price, so they got the Geo model instead of the Buick Riviera.
All right, that looks like all the questions we have today. Is there any last words?
Yeah, I just want to reiterate again, make sure that this isn't something that overwhelms you or something that you get nervous about. Bite it off in small chunks, make a plan and have a strategy, and then tactics within that. And again, I really urge, if you know other people in your space, talk to them, figure out what they're doing, and have it be an open conversation, because there will be people that can help you through this. And never be afraid to reach out. I've got my information here, my email address, and my phone number. I would suggest, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or email me if you have any questions. I'm having a call with somebody on Friday, and they just said, hey, we're not quite CMMC ready. I just have some questions for you. They're not even a potential customer with us. And I said, yeah, sure. I'll give you a half an hour and let's talk through what you're talking about, and who knows where that will lead, right? Feel free to reach out with questions. Don't hesitate to talk to people.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us again today. Thanks again to Tom for this presentation. It was really great, and I will give you some time back in your day. I hope you had a good one.
Yep. Thanks a lot, guys.
Bye.